Shalom. This week's Sedra is Sedrat Beshalach. God regularly tests the Jewish people, and in this week's Sedra we study a divine test of the Jewish people. In his commentary to the Torah, the Ramban offers an eye-opening, different perspective on God's tests. In this week's Sedra, we read about the manna. The Jewish people complained against Moshe and Aaron in the desert. The Jews said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of God in Egypt when we sat by pots of meat, when we ate bread to our fill. For you have brought us out to this desert to starve the entire congregation to death." God said to Moshe, "I'm going to rain down bread from the heaven for you, and the Jewish people shall go out and gather what is needed for that day, so that I can test them, whether or not they will follow my teachings." In his comments to the notion of God testing the Jewish people, Rashi wrote, "Through giving of the man, I will test whether the Jewish people will keep the commandments. For example, whether they will leave any of it over until the next day, and that they will not go out on Shabbat to gather the man." The Ramban took a different approach. He wrote that the test was whether to see if the Jewish people would follow the entire Torah while still in the desert. The people had no food, were commanded to travel through a desert, and could only rely on the man for sustenance. The Ramban understood that the test of the man to be whether the Jewish people would continue to follow the Torah without the security of a guaranteed food supply, or whether they would abandon God and search for food on their own. Both Rashi and the Ramban's concept of God testing the Jewish people seems simple enough. The Jews were given man, and God waits to see if the man will strengthen or weaken their faith in God and their commitment to God's mitzvos. Yet, if we look at an earlier episode of a test and the Ramban's explanation of the earlier episode, we have an entirely different take. Earlier in the Torah, God commanded Avram to give his son Yitzchak as an offering to Hashem. God tested Avram. He said to him, "Avram, please take your son, your only one, whom you love, Yitzchak, and go to the Moriah mountain and bring him up for a burnt offering on the mountains that I will tell you." In his explanation of this test, the Ramban wrote that God only tests a righteous person who he knows will pass that test. God doesn't need to assess the people. He knows what they will do. Rather, reward is only given for effort and sacrifice, and God provides opportunities for people to demonstrate the commitment he knows they already have through putting them in situations that will allow them to succeed. God tested Avram not to see whether he would offer his son, but rather to give him the opportunity to show just how far he'd go for his dedication to Hashem. If we apply that same idea to the test we read about this week, we see that God wasn't assessing the Jewish people, but giving them the opportunity to demonstrate that even without any foreseeable food supply, the people were willing to follow God and His Torah. This explanation leads us to ask, what kind of commitments are we able to demonstrate, if only given the opportunity? Shabbat Shalom.